Good afternoon. My name is Maria Victoria Mateos and I work as hematologist at the University Hospital of Salamanca in Spain. And it's my pleasure to be here attending the European Hematology Association meeting in Vienna. And it's my pleasure to welcome to Professor Richardson from the University of Harvard in Boston in the US. Good afternoon, Dr. Richardson.
Maria V, it's my pleasure. Lovely to see you.
I would like to discuss with you the latest news that we are attending during this Congress for the management of our patients with multiple myeloma. What is your feedback?
Well, this meeting has really built so nicely on ASCO with, I think, the excitement around the monoclonal antibodies dominating the presentations in myeloma, and also, of course, the very positive results in the area of new proteasome inhibitors, importantly carfilzomib, really showing the results of the Endeavour study, and at the same time also some of the excitement around next generation proteasome inhibitors like ixazomib. So I think that's been very encouraging. And then I think the other piece of this has been very positive data with pomalidomide continuing to show its activity in combination and its very reassuring safety profile. But I think really for me the most exciting aspect of this meeting has been the immunotherapeutics and in particular the monoclonal antibodies. We've got the groundbreaking data of elotuzumab, which basically is the first randomized phase 3 trial in myeloma to show the clinical benefit of elotuzumab when partnered with immunomodulatory therapy. And I think to see a substantial progression-free survival benefit between the control group and the three-drug platform, which is of course elotuzumab, lenalidomide and dexamethasone, but to also see that in high-risk patients with adverse cytogenetics that the effects are particularly impressive, and to see that in high-quality responses the durability of disease control is remarkable, I think has been really exciting. The flip of that has been that the tolerability of the combination has been great. It's been great to see the same efficacy in patients under the age of 65 and over the age of 65. That, I think, is emblematic. And I think the final comment I'd make is that the data surrounding daratumumab, with the presentation of the results from the large phase 2 study in the United States, is really encouraging for patients. It's showing that as a single agent, daratumumab in multiply resistant patients is able to overdrive all of those features and generate a robust response rate in about a third of patients. And I think, that provides, the platform for an approval for daratumumab going forward. So I think we've got two great new antibodies and lots of data around that, which I think are very encouraging.
Yeah, you know that also during this Congress, an abstract will be presented about the combination of daratumumab as backbone for relapsed and refractory myeloma patients in combination with pomalidomide and dexamethasone, and also in newly diagnosed myeloma patients in combination with bortezomib dexamethasone, bortezomib melphalan and prednisone, or bortezomib plus thalidomide plus dexamethasone. So from my point of view, these results showed encouraging results because more than 50% of the patients responded to daratumumab plus pomalidomide and dexamethasone, and all patients responded in newly diagnosed. And so I think that daratumumab probably will represent a backbone for the therapy of all of our myeloma patients. However, I would like also to discuss with you the different approaches of therapy in the US and Europe, because you know that here in Europe, bortezomib-based combination remain the standard of care for newly diagnosed myeloma patients. Lenalidomide and dexamethasone at the moment of first relapse, because we don't usually use lenalidomide in first line, and we have recently approved pomalidomide as rescue therapy after lenalidomide. How is your situation? How different is your standard of care in the US?
Well, I think it's a great question. And I think as these new antibodies arrive, I think what we have to realize globally in our myeloma community is the value of these new combinations. We've got, as you so nicely point out, the IMiD backbone and the proteasome inhibitor backbone, and we can add to that monoclonals that are transformative in terms of outcome. Obviously, we have the very encouraging data from elotuzumab, which is in a different class of antibody to the CD38 targeting molecules. And now we have CD38 targeting antibodies, not just one but several, where I think we're going to see absolute changes in the treatment paradigm. As you know, we're already looking at the issue of transplant. Where does transplant belong? And I think as you see these cellular therapies, i.e. the manipulation of autologous immunity in a way that doesn't necessarily require the stem cell platform, we're going to see our treatment paradigms fundamentally change. And from a regulatory point of view, it's a very dynamic landscape. And from a cost point of view, it's equally dynamic. So I think that the differences between the US and outside of the US center on a number of things. I think on the one hand, we are blessed with a very, very interactive and constructive relationship with our FDA, particularly the myeloma team, and we've seen approvals. For example, we've seen the HDAC inhibitor panobinostat approved in the US and now approved in Europe. You know, that is a completely new mechanism of action, and there is data on panobinostat at this meeting and also data on other HDACs, importantly the ricolinostat molecule, which is showing promise because it's not only more selective but it's less toxic. So I think these are new drugs that are going to change the way we treat this disease. So putting that all together, my sense of it is that in the US we're lucky because we have access. We have the ready approval of new drugs, not least of which is carfilzomib, in addition to pomalidomide. And I think in Europe carfilzomib is coming, isn't it? I very much hope so. Yeah, I think so. I think it's a terrific new addition to the armamentarium. So I think the way to think of this is that in the US we're fortunate to have access, so we are able to use drugs earlier. But what I think is very wise is to recognize the value of real evidence-based approaches, because if you use everything that you have early, what are you then left with? Mm-hmm. And I personally think that the algorithm of bortezomib-based therapy up front, the integration of lenalidomide early, the use of pomalidomide in relapse, and the rational introduction of the antibodies in an orderly fashion is as applicable in the US as it is in Europe. And so I think whilst there are differences, there are very common themes that must underlie what we do. Again, we're thinking about a disease that at the moment is not curable. Therefore, it behoves us to be very careful about long-term consequences of what we do. And whilst, you know, you and I are very familiar and comfortable with the use of bortezomib, I think carfilzomib is an amazing drug, but there is a signal there that it can have some side effects in a few patients that can be long-lasting. So do we move carfilzomib right up front? No, we don't, because we need to figure out where it best belongs, and randomized trials will guide us in that regard. And I think the same applies to the antibodies, but having said that, my sense of the antibodies is they will move earlier in the same way that carfilzomib will, and also arguably the HDAC inhibitors, but I do think it has to be in a rational fashion.
And finally, I would like to ask by the checkpoint inhibitors, PD-1 inhibitors, PD-L1 inhibitors. What is your opinion about these new agents?
Yes, I am very glad you asked that. I think that, you know, we touched on it at a presentation we gave yesterday. I mean, the point is that what I showed yesterday was the very promising preclinical rationale for their use. We've recognized from a very elegant work from colleagues in the laboratory that PD-1 and PD-L1 is as important a target in myeloma as it is in other diseases. We've tested early some of the inhibitors, be it the pembrol compound or nivolumab. As single agents, they've not shown very much. That's actually exactly as you'd expect. It's very analogous to elotuzumab, actually. But when you add the overdriver or the supercharger of immunomodulation through an IMiD, and specifically lenalidomide, the picture completely changes. And what I showed yesterday was that when in the laboratory systems, if you add immunomodulation to the checkpoint inhibitors, it's highly synergistic. And we have tantalizing clues from early trial data that remain unpresented, so one has to be a little bit careful. But suffice to say, the early reports of these trials from investigators is very favorable. So I would suggest to you that this will be a very important new frontier. Just as the antibodies are, so will be the checkpoint inhibitors. And arguably, I would foresee us, as in clinical investigators, together exploring elotuzumab, pomalidomide, nivolumab, and starting to use these immunological strategies with CD38 inhibition as a construct. And it was so interesting yesterday because as part of our panel in our symposium, we were blessed with a phenomenal patient who was diagnosed about 20 years ago. He's a lovely man from Texas. He's never had a stem cell transplant. And he had bad disease when it presented. I mean, celiac disease was not indolent. It was very active and aggressive. And he, for 20 years, has done very well with novel therapies. So I think this reflects that he is an example of the sea change in the way we manage this illness.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you think that we are going to go through a personalized medicine in myeloma?
You're absolutely right. I completely agree. I think that, you know, as you and I know, myeloma is not one disease. It is many. And sorry to sound sort of terribly sort of metaphorical, but one size really does not fit all. And I think that's very important. So I think that when you think of it in that context, we realize that having therapeutic options allows us to be tailored. Mm-hmm. And I think in the parallel fashion, you know, for us as clinicians, it's wonderful that our laboratory and correlative science colleagues are bringing us tools through gene expression profiling and obviously all of the new exciting technologies, MRD and so forth, that will give us the way to tailor people's treatment even more.
I absolutely agree. And in fact, we have had the opportunity to see new agents, as you mentioned, with no activity as single agent. But we need investigational studies, additional research studies, because sometimes these new agents with no activity as single agent in combination with other drugs are able even to overcome the refractoriness to the prior agents. And I think that this is relevant for the management of our patients with myeloma, that it's clear that they are living longer and longer now at the present time, and we need new options of therapy to be treated.
Completely agree. Yes, I think it's a very promising time. I think the subtext here is that whilst there's great optimism, we have to be very realistic that this remains an incurable illness. And for you and I, who work day in, day out in the clinic and take care of our patients continuously, we know that this remains a fundamentally very challenging and dangerous hematologic malignancy. So I think you're absolutely right. It's not a zero-sum game. We need all the options we can get, and we're blessed at the moment that there's a steady throughput. And I think what particularly for me is exciting is this whole immuno-oncologic field has to it a flavor of durability that will further enhance where we already are. So I think I'm just, you know, if you had told me 5-6 years ago that we would have antibodies of the quality we have and immunologic tools that we have of this sort of promise, I would have never guessed that we would be in such a good position as we are now.
So I think that, summarizing, I think that the message for this interview is optimistic for myeloma physicians and also especially for myeloma patients, because there are many new agents that they will be incorporated in the future for the treatment, probably before in the US, a little bit later in Europe, but all patients will obtain a benefit. Thank you very much, Paul, and it has been a pleasure for me to be here with you.
Well, absolutely. Thank you, Mary V. The pleasure is all mine. Thank you.